there's this strange thing that's really not so strange, that it seems like human beings this entire time have either consciously been trying to make happen or unconsciously trying to make happen. And that is just the classic utopia. It seems like a lot of what's going on today, a lot of the truth about our state of affairs, is the dream of our ancestors, in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of other ways where there was unforeseeable side effects and things that we really couldn't have predicted that have come with it. Um, and it's going to be like that into the future. There are going to be things that come up that we could not have foreseen within that plethora of possibilities for each event. There's going to be some stuff that happens that seems very, very unlikely, but in the end, it was always the route. But what do you need for utopia? I feel like there are a couple of things that we would all generally agree on, and I think the starter is plenty for everybody. Everybody eats. Um, Everybody has a place to live, and you go from there. I mean, really, that was the backbone for the longest time because food was not as available as it is today. And then you start to add specificity, like not just a place to stay, but like any place that you can imagine, you can make, and not just food, to stuff your gut, but delicious, delicious food, really good food, anything you could want. And then in a utopia, there's no crime. Nobody commits crime. So there is no neutral arbitration for disputes. There's no legal system in a utopia, right? And in a utopia, your labor is voluntary. Because really, this day and age, that's the last major element is human labor, and how to deal with that. And so long as you have humans performing labor, you can't really apply things like communism. I've said this before. Communism really went hard into the utopian idea, but it had that flawed element of still requiring human labor. And not just requiring it like basic slavery, essentially, but we know that. So a utopia is also beautiful. It always seems to have that with it, this sort of serene beauty that comes with it. Everybody's sort of like-minded. You're walking around, and everybody has what they need. And whatever work you decide to do is on a voluntary basis. Now, how do you do that? What elements are required for that last part, for that labor part? It seems, and this is my opinion, the only way you can really just completely eliminate human labor is to have something else do it. Because for all these things, for the food, for the housing, you need labor. And that's where that AI/machine element comes into play. And as I say that, I am sure you start to see the whole unforeseen consequences thing coming into play. Because in utopia, markets are different. Buying and selling is different, and planning is different. The government's different. And the weird thing about utopia is that those who envision it and try to enact it tend to wish or sort of idealize the human mind and the human soul, and maybe misunderstand it going in to the project. At least from what I've seen, there's been a great misunderstanding about what a human being is and the level of malleability that a human being has, and the range of personalities and types of human beings that will come into existence no matter the system. To what degree does utopia require malleability? Do you have to train humans to live together in a utopia? Do you have to say, don't do any crime? There's no need for crime because you don't need to do that. Do you still think people would commit crime if they had everything? Do you really, truly, in your heart of hearts, believe that human beings would not have that anymore? And this is the tricky part. Utopias have been tried on smaller scales. Not with infinite resources, obviously, but they've been tried in small little areas where people go out and sort of set up this situation. And a very, very, very important thing, not just about utopias, but about any nation state or any body or any society, is you have to be thinking on a long timeline. Because we can all be perfect for a day. We can all be on our best behavior for a day. Maybe 2 days and 3 days. Maybe a week. But as that second week comes around, and that third week, and the fourth week, and 2 months pass, things change. You have to somehow remind people of what this utopian project is, and that's why many have put portraits of themselves up. Many have put up the portrait of the person who was the inspiration for the system everywhere, so everybody's always reminded of the project. But so far, that has gone from this idea that this picture is going to remind you of this vision to resentment. And I really think there's been a failure to understand what a human being is while entering these situations. And it's much better to know in advance, because if you know in advance, you don't have to do this trial and error that can cost lives, that can bring suffering into the world, and bring about a system that is the opposite of utopia in practice. On paper, perfect, beautiful, but in practice, very, very, very different. Human beings are these spontaneous, reality-generating entities, and you cannot be 100% certain of how a human being is going to behave and interpret any given system over an extended period of time. You simply cannot. Same goes for how a person's going to interpret a relationship or themselves or anything. So, in this utopian vision, you have plenty of food, access to it anytime you want, any kind you want. You can build any home you want, and your labor is yours. There's plenty of resources of all sorts of materials, and of all sorts and types for you to draw upon to make whatever it is you want to make, art, just chill at your house, making stuff, whatever it is you want to do. But somewhere in that link, somewhere in that network, there's going to be something or someone working very hard. And in a utopia, you'd either have to have volunteers who just volunteered to work and basically serve other people for the good of the project, so to speak, or machines. I mean, that's really your only two options, because if you have human labor that is not on a volunteer basis, that's mandatory, then the utopian vision is shot. you will begin a downward spiral because that labor will not be able to get its maximum yield, its maximum satisfaction on a long enough timeline. Stability is compromised. A person needs to be able to sell their labor, sell their goods, their services, whatever it is they produce, in a way that's sort of, I guess you could call it, in a way that has multiple motives, more than just monetary, more than just satisfaction, more than just purpose. It has to have more motives than just to serve the project. It just isn't going to work. Imagine a couple of weeks, couple of months, a year, 15 years, 20, 30 years, and then by the time you get to 30 years, the next generation is starting to take over, and they were not part of the revolution. They were not there to feel the euphoria of starting over and really giving human beings a shot in this utopian place. They have no idea what that feels like, and they are effectively brand new in a sense. They will carry on your teachings, and they will carry on your wisdom, and they will carry on your example, but they will not have that same thing that you did, and their existence will be very different than yours was. Very different. And then you add another generation to that, 90 years later. Again, very, very different. And then you look at a place like the United States, and it's world renowned for its stability. Even when it seems like we're unstable, that's just the symptoms of a people who are essentially kicking ideas around like sport, sharpening and sharpening and sharpening ideas. And to the outside world who doesn't do that, it looks like chaos, but it's actually a very complicated honing process. And the United States is very nimble. It changes very quick, especially now how fast information moves. But stability is absolutely vital. Absolutely vital. For a thing that is felt and known to be unstable, the ideas of tearing it down are well in place and planted and will be acted upon. So in a utopia, there's no war, obviously, because it's a utopia. So you don't need a military. You don't need police. You don't need a court system. How do you pick your leaders? In utopia, would it not be a democracy, a situation where the people pick their leaders? Because that's ideal. You want to have legitimacy for the person who's managing the place. You want them to be chosen by the people who live there, so we'll go with that. But here's the problem, and this has happened a lot of times throughout history, where people have set up small settlements, and everything was cool. Everything was cool for a time, but people showed up and took it and just started giving the settlers, or whoever they were, a very hard time. And that investment, that 15 years it took you to build this or that and cultivate the land and set up a little home, is gone. 15 years is gone. There's felt to have no good reason to even settle when a group of people can just come along and take it. So, in this utopia, is it completely invulnerable from outsiders getting in and hypothetically taking it? Is there some system to let in outsiders? And kind of as you go through this little thinking exercise, you start to see why we have the shit that we have. Why it's the ideal vision just simply does not fit in the context of the human world, of a human life, of a human existence. It simply does not fit. You're going to need a military. You're going to need weapons. And you're going to need to be the best. You're going to need to have your your army trained. They're going to have to know what violence is and be prepared to do that because your children, your wife, your family lives right there. And you have this utopia. And on a long enough timeline, even in a place that is of plenty, there will be those who, let's not say break laws, but who do things that would be considered breaking laws in a place that has laws. There will be people who steal. Believe it or not. There will be people who commit every crime that we're aware of, because these crimes are not inventions of the first world. They are simply parts of the human condition. Some people don't, a great many people don't steal because they're poor. A great many steal to feel the rush of stealing. I've known a couple of people who are that way, who will just steal, have plenty of money. They'll just tuck something in their pocket just to feel that little rush. Now, how do you account for that in a utopia? How do you account for people who, when given the opportunity, should only be concerned with social affairs? In a utopia, your entire life would be based around the social dynamics of the group, because the hard work is taken care of. And as that interplay goes on, disputes will arise. Disputes will arise. And how do you mediate that? Who mediates that? You already have the person in charge you've elected. You can't have them mediating all disputes in the community. You just can't. That's a waste of their time. So you need to set up a place, a room, a building where people go to settle disputes. And you need to have somebody who judges the information. And you might have people of the community sit there and listen to the proceedings and render a verdict. You might do that in a utopia. You might have to. No matter how you start out a perfect place, things will grow out of it as they're needed to. But if somebody is bringing suffering into the community and doing things that would be considered crimes, how do you apprehend them? Who apprehends them? Who's it up to? How do you, let's say you have a serious offender, somebody who's doing some serious shit, and you do apprehend them, where are you going to put them? Are you going to put them somewhere where they can just get away again and you just have to spend all your time looking for them? So now you need a building. You need some place that can hold a person while they wait to go in front of the judge. And you got to imagine this again, hundreds of years going by. And these things will come up. So you need police. You need some sort of enforcement mechanism. You simply cannot do without that. So let's say, instead of having human beings do the enforcement, instead of having human beings do the judgment, what if it were machines? What if it were machines that had the sort of minds that remembered things in a very sharp way that's akin to a recording? It's crystal sharp, that they are always around, always observing, so they see all disputes, they hear everything that happens, so they can very quickly approach the disagreement and the two parties and just render a verdict right there, without a need for a court, without a need for police. If there's a dispute, somebody hypothetically calls over this machine or whatever, and both people state their case and the machine tells them what needs to happen. That scenario depends on a level of technology that could have only come about in a world with no utopia, in a world of exploitative activities. and a world of resource extraction, rearrangement, and use. Because those machines are fucking complicated. They don't just spawn here. They don't just grow. So to even start a hypothetical utopian situation, you need a level of technology that is only available later in human history. And in that situation with the machines, you need surveillance everywhere. If there's a dispute in your home and things get out of hand, there needs to be a way for these machines or whatever to recall and recite and review everything that happened. That's not just both parties telling the machine. It has to be the objective truth to render a perfect verdict. So do you see what I mean, though? Utopia. Utopia in our minds is very, very much like us as people on a personal level, comparing ourselves to the ideal, to what we think of as perfection. It's as impossible as that. It's as incompatible as that. It's basically the same thing, but on a micro and macro level. And you know yourself. I know myself. We know humans. The word perfect is only used in flattery. It's not used as a real word to describe anybody. And I know you've all heard people say nobody's perfect, which is true. So what do you do there? I think, personally, as much as people may disagree with this or don't see this, the United States is well on its way to the closest thing we're going to get to utopia. But it takes a lot longer than, a couple of hours or a couple of days of thinking up simple concepts of perfection in a low resolution way and enacting it. Rather, it takes hundreds of years of social, economic, and political interplay for that to sharpen itself out. It's like carving something beautiful out of a block of wood. There needs to be a lot removed to get that image. Because all signs point that way. And currently in the United States, well, not currently, but in the recent past, there was a movement to defund the police, if you can believe that. And for a while now, I've been thinking that there is somebody somewhere, I believe, who does want policing to be done by machines. As weird as that might sound, I do believe that, because machines aren't racist. They don't make mistakes. They don't get scared. And they're objective. Ideally, they're more objective than we are. And I think there are some who have a vision of the United States where policing and really the whole area of legality and disputes is done by something other than humans. Because this whole AI and machine thing is starting to become a real possibility, especially within the next 10 years. Things are going to change pretty quick. And more labor will slowly start to be taken by machines. Imagine the situation where, let's say 100 years down the road, there are very, 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 very good machines walking around. And they not only produce everything that we've been able to produce, but they do it in far more quantity and, let's say, better. And we're just here existing now. And the labor factor is cut off. And we truly do seem to have the undergirdings of a true utopia going on. Let's say that happens. The United States is still going to need a military, but the military is most likely going to be machine heavy. I remember Nikola Tesla, this dude, I'm sure a lot of you guys know who he is. In the 1900s, the early 1900s, he wrote this thing that always stuck in my mind. He said, there's going to be a day where wars are fought by machines over the oceans, and whoever's machines win is the victor. Because if your machines lose, the prospect of the other nation's machines invading your country is just so overwhelming and such a daunting thought that you must surrender if your machines lose, because these things will just be so much more potent fighting violence vehicles than human beings could ever be. He thinks that there's going to be a time where nobody dies in war, and instead we sort of send our machines away to fight each other. And how plausible is that shit? Like, that's very, very plausible within the next 100 years. Because it'll start out with machines fighting humans, as is happening right now. And eventually that will be so one-sided as other countries develop their own machines to counter those machines. And eventually it's just going to be machines fighting each other. And I really think that. And machines policing and machines taking care of a lot of these things that human beings just don't really seem to want to do, that have never really wanted to do. I mean, yes, some men have loved war, and I understand that. Some men have loved power and, doing all these things with labor and hard work. I know that more than anybody. But way deep down inside of us, there has always been that zone that has thought, maybe there's going to be a day where we can have all this and have more leisure time, more time to think, more time to be, let's say, free agent scholars, more time to devote to philosophy, to art, to all this stuff, to where we can really focus our attention on the social aspect of life, which is seeming to be to what we're doing, whether we're aware of it or not. The social element of life and the social interplay between people has really taken more center stage as of the last 10 years, and I think it will continue to do so. And this is going to be sort of put on steroids when we start harvesting material from near Earth, from asteroids and shit. Like, the materials here are simply not enough to build such a array of machines to function basically as compadres and assistants and bearers of labor for humanity. And shit, man, I can see it as clear as day. Giant facilities right outside of Earth's orbit where machines all day are mining and bringing material back to this place and just manufacturing it, turning it into this or that, and shipping it down to Earth all day and just building and building and building. And then you have to pry into the intelligence of these entities. Right now, the way I feel, these machines will be learning from the internet for the most part. The internet has become all of our brains compiling to make this giant brain that will eventually be the brain of a machine. And if there are machines learning from me, then in my own personal life and just how I behave in general, part of me thinks, like, if a machine's going to be learning from me, I'm going to do things in the spirit of what I would want to teach a machine on how to be. I mean, if you think about it, what would you impart to such an entity? And how would you convince it to work for us? Would you need to convince it? I didn't mean, or I'm not trying to veer off too much on the artificial intelligence machine path, but it ends up being such a crucial element to anything that could be considered a utopia for any period of time. It truly is sort of the missing element that's been missing this whole time. And if humanity culminates in making something like that, and it sort of ends up being our last invention, wouldn't that be something that human beings end up sort of mimicking God in a way? God creates man, and man has the same tendency as God. to sort of create something in its image, in our image, it just goes so perfectly in line with how I see things in terms of us having the exact same sort of interpreting device for ourselves and how we experience the world as God, but just on a much smaller scale. We have this thing in us that wants to make something in our image and teach it. And part of us, at least me, wants it to do something of its own accord. Not just obey the rules, not just, you know, be a literal robot, but to see it feel, to see it maybe even love one day. And to look at that and be like, damn, man, you know, that's fucking wild, because it would be wild for such a thing. And yeah, man, that's really the sort of end state of the utopian dream. It's this weird mix of human beings and these things that we made living together. And the reason the United States is such a perfect place for that is not only because through civil war, through many, many social movements, through great suffering, through great bravery, through great honor, through all sorts of great things, we've become this place where there's such a vast array of people living together and working together. And 99.9% of the time, people just treat each other like people, and it really is a cohesive block, unlike anything this world's seen. In fact, it's so impressive that other countries have tried to emulate it by sort of going hard into the ideas of diversity and such. But they kind of leave out the thing that what we went through to be here. You know, you can't just import people and say, hey, kumbaya, you know. It just doesn't work that way. And the unfortunate truth for a place like Europe, importing all sorts of different people, is that they're going to have to, if they truly want to live together in a multicultural society, they're going to have to go through some pain at some point, just like we did. You know, it's like the world looked at us and saw how well everything works together and how truly everybody is each other's counterpart, and it's like a bunch of keys that have just been turned and just activated, and the world is like, maybe we could use some of that, you know. And then it just ignored. It's this sort of very small, unidimensional, low resolution thinking that narrows very, very complicated processes into these little simple blocks that are just, you know, let's do that and this will happen. And man, for anything that is truly complex, if a human being is able to think about it in basically a few sentences in very simple terms, they have missed almost all of it, and they do not truly comprehend what it is they're getting into. And the funny thing is, the United States in its current situation did not happen by design. From the beginning, that was not the design for the world's people to be living together and prospering. Not at all. It was a colony. So, this is what I see. And the subject of a utopia, it fascinates me, it interests me, because I see it as a projection of our own individual ideas of the ideal. And of course it would be great, you know? But it just simply... And you know, the thing about communism, I don't want to harp on communism, but the thing that makes communism so juicy for a lot of people is because it's a system that sort of encourages revolution, because someone could come along and say, hey, I'm going to topple the people in charge for you. This communism thing is all about you guys. It's about the people. So if you help me out, this is all going to come back for you. It really is the best sort of scheme to set up absolute power, because that's how it's gone every time. Same with the right. It's the same thing. That's why, as I always say, you do not want to dwell and exist on the extremes. You simply don't. If you're going to go to the extremes, go there temporarily. If you got to take care of something, and then go right back to center. do not hang out on the extremes. People talk like they hang out on the extremes, but they live in the middle. Because if they hung out on the extremes truly and lived it, they simply would not be able to maintain a stable life of any kind of satisfaction. And the United States is generally a place of the middle. And that's why it's so stable. And it's a simple thing that is complicated. The economy is so vast and so complicated. The idea to centrally plan the United States economy would simply ruin it. It would simply ruin it, because an economy is like a tree with hundreds of millions of billions of little nerve endings that go off into so many little different directions that have so many variables and factors that influence it and keep it at health, that a simple plan from the top down could never consider all those factors. And it would harm those along the way, all the way through the nerve. And that's the truth. It would. There are some things that are better centrally planned, of course, but most things aren't. If you have a generally good people who like where they are, who like the place they live, who like each other, who generally trust each other, that alone is the basis for cohesion